If a global war started tomorrow, it wouldn't begin with explosions. It would begin with hesitation, with leaders staring at screens, waiting, thinking, searching, thinking a little longer. And by the time the world realized war had begun, the systems holding civilization together might already be failing. Modern global war is not about conquest the way it once was. It is about pressure, speed, deterrence, and escalation that moves faster than human judgment. To understand what a modern world war could look like, we have to start with the weapon that defines the era, even when no one wants to use it: nuclear weapons. While you are at it, please click like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. Nuclear weapons don't just destroy cities. They reshape how wars are fought before the first shot is fired. Every major military power plans around them. Every alliance is shaped by them. Every crisis between great powers is haunted by them. This is why so many experts believe that any direct conflict between major powers would eventually involve nuclear weapons, even if no one intends for it to. Not because leaders want nuclear war, but because once conventional conflict escalates far enough, nuclear weapons stop being unthinkable and start being framed as necessary. That transition is where the danger lies. Nuclear escalation is rarely imagined as a sudden choice to end the world. In reality, it would likely happen in steps. A conventional war begins. One side starts losing ground. Military leaders feel pressure to regain control. They look for a way to shock the battlefield without triggering total annihilation. This is where the idea of limited nuclear use enters the conversation. And this is where things spiral. Strategic nuclear weapons are designed for massive destruction. They target cities, infrastructure, and population centers. Their purpose is deterrence through the threat of catastrophic retaliation. Tactical nuclear weapons are different. They are smaller, designed for battlefield use, meant to destroy hardened military targets rather than cities. Some analysts believe leaders might convince themselves that using a tactical nuclear weapon could end a war quickly or force negotiations. The logic goes like this: one small nuclear strike is better than a long, devastating war. But this logic ignores one critical truth. There is no reliable way to stop escalation once nuclear weapons are used. The moment one nuclear weapon detonates, the psychological barrier is broken. Retaliation becomes likely. Allies are pulled in. Decisions compress from days into minutes. At that point, war is no longer controlled by strategy. It is controlled by fear. In earlier wars, leaders had time. Messages took hours or days. Battles unfolded over weeks or months. In a modern nuclear conflict, decision windows could be measured in minutes. Early warning systems detect launches. Algorithms evaluate trajectories. Leaders must decide whether to respond before knowing if an attack is real. False alarms have already occurred in history. The difference now is speed. The faster war moves, the less room there is for human restraint. Even a limited nuclear exchange would not stay limited for long. And if enough nuclear weapons are used, the greatest danger may not be radiation or explosions. It would be the climate. A large-scale nuclear exchange could push massive amounts of smoke and debris into the upper atmosphere. This material could block sunlight for months or even years. Global temperatures would drop. Rain patterns would change. Growing seasons would collapse. This is what's commonly referred to as nuclear winter. The world's food systems are not built for this. Modern agriculture depends on stable weather, predictable seasons, and global trade. Disrupt those systems, and famine becomes a real possibility, even in regions untouched by direct conflict. The cruel irony is this: countries far from the fighting could suffer just as much as those at the center of it. When people imagine nuclear war, they often focus on casualty counts. Millions, tens of millions, numbers too large to feel real. But the deeper cost is societal. Healthcare systems would collapse under pressure. Governments would struggle to function. Trust in institutions would erode. Survival would become uneven, shaped by geography, infrastructure, and luck. And even for survivors, the world that remains would not resemble the one that existed before. If nuclear weapons are so dangerous, why do they still exist? Because they are believed to prevent war, until they don't. Deterrence relies on rational actors, perfect information, and calm decision-making under stress. History shows humans are rarely perfect at any of these. As long as nuclear weapons exist, they shape every major conflict. even when they are never used. And that leads us to the next transformation of modern war. Because if nuclear weapons don't end the conflict immediately, the battlefield itself expands into places humanity has never fought before. In the next part, we'll explore how modern war moves beyond land, sea, and air, into space, cyberspace, and the invisible systems that keep civilization running. We'll look at how satellites become targets, how economies become weapons, and why modern cities may no longer offer safety. Because the next World War wouldn't just be fought by soldiers. It would be fought by systems. Modern war would not stay confined to tanks, planes, and soldiers. If a global conflict broke out today, the battlefield would expand almost instantly into places most people never think about. Orbit, servers, financial networks, and invisible digital systems that quietly hold daily life together. This is where modern war becomes especially dangerous. Because these systems are not just military assets. They are civilian lifelines. Space is already crowded. Hundreds of satellites orbit Earth, quietly performing tasks most people never notice. They guide airplanes, coordinate shipping, enable GPS navigation, support weather forecasting, carry internet traffic, monitor military movements. In a modern global war, these satellites would not remain neutral. They would become targets. Remove satellites, and the modern world begins to stumble. GPS outages disrupt transportation. Communication satellites failing isolate entire regions. Military forces lose surveillance and coordination. Emergency services struggle to respond. Modern militaries depend on space more than any battlefield in history. And because space assets are fragile and expensive, they are tempting targets. But there's a problem. Destroying satellites creates debris. Debris creates more collisions. More collisions create more debris. This can spiral into something known as a cascade effect, where space becomes increasingly unusable for years or even decades. A war in space could permanently damage humanity's ability to use it. Unlike traditional warfare, space conflict wouldn't be obvious to civilians. There would be no explosions in the sky, no warning sirens. Instead, systems would simply stop working. GPS glitches, drop calls, navigation failures, weather forecasts growing unreliable. People might not realize a war in space had begun until daily life started breaking down. And that's what makes it so dangerous. If space is the quiet battlefield, cyberspace is the invisible one. Cyber warfare would likely be one of the first tools used in a modern global conflict, long before missiles fly. Why? Because cyber attacks are cheap, deniable, and fast. They can disrupt entire nations without firing a single shot. Cyber warfare isn't about hacking personal computers. It targets systems, power grids, banking networks, water treatment facilities, transportation controls, healthcare databases, government communication systems. These systems are deeply interconnected. Damage one, and others feel the effects. A successful cyber attack could shut down electricity in major cities, freeze bank accounts, disable emergency services, disrupt supply chains. And because these systems are digital, attacks can happen instantly, across borders, without warning. One of the most dangerous aspects of cyber warfare is uncertainty. When a power grid fails, who did it? Was it a foreign government? A criminal group? A technical failure? This ambiguity creates instability. Leaders may retaliate based on incomplete information. Mistakes become more likely. Escalation becomes harder to control. In a tense global environment, misattribution alone could push nations toward open conflict. Modern global war wouldn't just be fought with weapons. It would be fought with markets. Economic warfare aims to weaken an opponent without direct combat. Sanctions, trade restrictions, asset freezes, technology bans. In a global conflict, these tools would be used aggressively. But the modern economy is deeply interconnected. Hurting one nation often hurts many others. Modern prosperity depends on global supply chains. Raw materials extracted in one country, components manufactured in another, assembly in a third, shipping across oceans, distribution worldwide. A global war would fracture these chains. Ports close, shipping lanes become unsafe, insurance costs skyrocket, trade slows or stops. The result? Shortages. Not just luxury goods, essentials. Food, medicine, energy, industrial components. Even wealthy nations would feel the strain. Economic warfare is often seen as a safer alternative to military action, but it can spiral. Sanctions provoke retaliation. Retaliation fractures alliances. Neutral countries are forced to choose sides. Markets react with fear. Investments dry up. Currencies destabilize. The global economy, built on trust and predictability, begins to crack. While space and cyber warfare unfold invisibly, conflict on the ground would change too. Cities have become the primary environment of human life. And in a modern war, cities would also become battlefields. Cities are dense, complex, interconnected. They rely on constant flows of electricity, water, food, data, and transportation. In war, these flows become vulnerabilities. Air superiority makes surface movement dangerous. Surveillance satellites watch everything above ground. So combat moves underground. Tunnels, subways, basements, utility corridors. Urban warfare increasingly shifts below the surface to avoid detection and airstrikes. This levels the playing field. High-tech advantages shrink. Infantry combat becomes more important. Battles become slower, more brutal, and more chaotic. Civilians are caught in the middle. Urban warfare doesn't just destroy buildings. It destroys normalcy. Daily routines vanish. Fear becomes constant. Trust erodes. Even after fighting ends, cities can take generations to recover. And in a global war, many cities could experience this simultaneously. Earlier wars often separated front lines from civilian life. Modern war erases that separation. Infrastructure is the battlefield. Economies are targets. Information itself becomes a weapon. Civilians are no longer bystanders. They are participants, whether they want to be or not. They are participants, whether they want to be or not. What's coming next? So far, we've looked at how war expands into space, cyberspace, economies, and cities. But the deepest consequences come afterward. When supply chains collapse, when food shortages spread, when healthcare systems fail, when entire societies strain under pressure. In the next part, we'll explore global societal and economic impacts, including mass casualties, long-term instability, and why modern wars don't really end. Modern civilization looks solid from the outside. Cities glow at night. Stores are full. Information moves instantly. But beneath that surface is a fragile system, one that depends on constant motion. A modern global war wouldn't just destroy places. It would interrupt flows. And when flows stop, societies don't slowly decline. They fracture. Most countries today are not self-sufficient. They don't grow all their own food. They don't produce all their own energy. They don't manufacture all the parts they need. Instead, they rely on a web of global trade so complex that no single government fully controls it. This system works beautifully in peace. In war, it becomes a liability. Supply chains don't collapse all at once. They fail in layers. First, shipping becomes risky. Insurance costs surge. Ports slow down or close. Then manufacturing pauses. Factories lack components. Workers are laid off. Next, transportation falters. Fuel becomes scarce. Logistics companies struggle to operate. Finally, shelves empty, not everywhere at once, but unpredictably. This unpredictability is what causes panic. Food systems are highly optimized, but not resilient. Modern agriculture depends on fuel, fertilizer, machinery, transport, refrigeration, and stable weather. Disrupt any part of that chain, and yields drop. In a global war, fertilizer production may fall. Fuel shortages limit planting and harvest. Trade disruptions prevent redistribution. Food doesn't disappear, it becomes unevenly available. Some regions have surplus, others face shortages. And hunger spreads faster than bombs. Healthcare systems operate close to capacity, even in peace. They rely on international pharmaceutical supply chains, just-in-time inventory, stable electricity, and clean water. In a global conflict, these assumptions break. Medications become scarce. Hospitals struggle to function. Preventable illnesses rise. The result is a secondary death toll, not from violence, but from system failure. Every major war produces estimates of casualties. But modern global war defies easy calculation. Casualties wouldn't come only from combat. They would come from famine, disease, exposure, infrastructure collapse, Some projections suggest casualties far exceeding previous world wars. Others warn that population loss could reach unprecedented levels. The truth is unknowable. What is certain is that the indirect effects would dwarf the direct ones. War is not only physical, it is psychological. In a prolonged global conflict, uncertainty becomes constant. People wake up not knowing if power will be available, if food will arrive, if money will still work. Anxiety becomes normalized. Trust erodes. Social cohesion weakens. This strain doesn't end when fighting pauses. It lingers for decades. Modern war creates refugees. A global war would create them everywhere. As regions become unlivable, from conflict, radiation, famine, or infrastructure collapse, people move. Borders harden. Resources tighten. Host societies strain. This movement reshapes politics, demographics, and culture. And unlike past wars, there may be no safe regions untouched by ripple effects. Modern militaries rely on technology and professional forces. But technology doesn't replace manpower forever. In a long, grinding conflict, even advanced nations may face shortages of personnel. This is where the idea many people assume is gone could return. The draft. Modern warfare requires operators, technicians, logistics staff, cyber specialists, support personnel. As casualties mount and rotations stretch thin, voluntary service may not meet demand. Governments facing existential threats may resort to compulsory service, not necessarily for frontline combat, but to keep systems running. The social impact of this is enormous. Drafts test legitimacy. Some citizens comply out of duty. Others resist. Protests rise. Political divisions deepen. In democratic societies, this tension is especially sharp. The question becomes, how much sacrifice can a society demand before it fractures? War does not affect everyone equally. Those with resources adapt faster. Those without fall behind. Inflation rises. Savings lose value. Employment becomes unstable. Inequality widens. This fuels resentment, unrest, and internal conflict, even in countries not directly fighting. Modern money depends on trust. Trust in governments. Trust in banks. Trust in future stability. A global war erodes all three. Currencies fluctuate wildly. Markets swing on rumors. Confidence becomes fragile. Some people turn to physical assets. Others rely on barter. Economic behavior becomes localized. This fragmentation changes how societies function. Perhaps the most profound impact of a global war is subtle. Normal life vanishes. No long-term plans. No assumptions about tomorrow. No sense of continuity. Life becomes reactive. Survival replaces progress. And even if the war ends, rebuilding that sense of normalcy takes generations. So far, we've seen how modern war disrupts systems, breaks economies, and strains societies. But survival is not only about nations. It's about individuals and communities. In the next part, we'll explore geographically safer zones, resilience, and why some regions may weather a global conflict better than others, even when no place is truly safe. When people imagine a global war, one question always comes up. Where would be safest? It's a natural question. It's also a dangerous one, because modern global conflict doesn't respect borders the way older wars did. Still, geography matters, just not in the way most people expect. In discussions about global war, certain regions are often described as safer. Usually these are remote, sparsely populated, far from major military targets. The logic is simple. If you're far from the centers of power, you're less likely to be targeted. There's some truth to this, but it's incomplete. Most of the world's population lives in the Northern Hemisphere. So does most of its industry. So do most military alliances, bases, and nuclear arsenals. This concentration makes the Northern Hemisphere more vulnerable to direct military effects. But vulnerability doesn't mean total destruction, and distance doesn't guarantee safety. Regions often cited as more resilient include New Zealand, parts of Australia, certain areas of South America, select regions of Africa, remote island nations. These places share common traits: geographic isolation, lower strategic military value, smaller populations. In a direct nuclear exchange, they are less likely to be primary targets. That matters, but it doesn't make them immune. Even regions far from conflict face indirect consequences. Climate effects don't respect borders. Economic collapse spreads globally. Food systems are interconnected. Energy markets are international. A nuclear winter, if it occurs, affects everyone. Supply chain disruption affects everyone. Political instability spreads outward. Distance buys time, not immunity. Islands are often seen as safe havens. They're isolated, easy to defend, harder to invade. But islands rely heavily on imports. Food, fuel, medicine, technology. If shipping lanes are disrupted, isolation becomes a liability. An island cut off from trade doesn't need bombs to suffer. It just needs time. Large land masses offer different advantages. Internal food production, diverse climates, redundant infrastructure. But they also face challenges. Internal unrest, refugee flows, regional inequality. A large country may survive, but not evenly. Some regions stabilize, others fracture. In a modern global conflict, cities face unique risks. High population density, infrastructure dependence, limited local food production. Rural areas may appear safer, but rural regions depend on fuel, machinery, markets, medical access. Without those systems, isolation becomes dangerous. The truth is uncomfortable. Modern humans survive as systems, not as individuals. The idea of fleeing to a safer place is powerful. It gives people a sense of control. But large-scale migration during global crisis often creates new dangers. Border closures, resource shortages, political backlash. In many cases, the attempt to escape can be more dangerous than staying put. One of the biggest advantages in a crisis is information. Not rumors, not panic, reliable signals. In global war, information becomes scarce and contested. Propaganda spreads. False reports circulate. Trust erodes. Regions with strong communication networks and social cohesion often fare better than those with physical advantages alone. History shows this again and again. Communities that cooperate survive longer. Communities that fracture collapse faster. Shared resources, mutual aid, trust. These matter more than latitude or isolation. Global wars don't end cleanly. They fade, fragment, transform. Survival is not about riding out a single event. It's about adaptation over years, sometimes decades. Regions that can adjust economically, maintain governance, preserve social trust, recover faster. Others struggle long after the fighting stops. There is no perfect place, no guaranteed refuge. Modern war is systemic. It damages climate, trade, health, trust, everywhere. The goal is not absolute safety. It's resilience. So far, we've explored destruction, collapse, and survival. But there's another side. Preparation. Not fear-driven panic, but long-term thinking. In the next part, we'll examine how societies and individuals think about preparedness, self-sufficiency, and resilience, and why modern survival is less about stockpiles and more about adaptability. When people hear the phrase global war, the instinctive reaction is panic. Images flood the mind. Empty shelves, shelters, supplies, escape plans. But panic is not preparedness. In fact, panic is one of the fastest ways to make a bad situation worse. True preparedness, at both the individual and societal level, requires a very different mindset. Most emergency thinking is designed for short disruptions. A storm, a blackout, a natural disaster. These events have a clear beginning and end. A global conflict does not. It unfolds slowly, unevenly, unpredictably. The greatest danger isn't the initial shock. It's the long erosion of stability. Short-term thinking focuses on stockpiles. Long-term thinking focuses on systems. Survivalism often emphasizes isolation. Stock up. Shut out the world. Rely only on yourself. This approach feels logical. But modern humans do not survive alone. Isolation may help in brief emergencies. Over long periods, it becomes a liability. Supplies run out. Skills decay. Mental health suffers. The myth of total self-sufficiency collapses under time. Resilience is about flexibility. It's the ability to adapt when assumptions fail. A resilient system can absorb shocks, can reroute resources, can adjust behavior. This applies to individuals, communities, and nations alike. The most resilient societies are not the most heavily armed or stocked. They are the most cooperative and adaptable. Throughout history, communities that survived crises shared common traits: mutual support, resource sharing, clear communication, social trust. In prolonged crises, lone actors struggle. Communities distribute risk. One person has food, another has medical knowledge, another has mechanical skills. Together, they form a system. Preparedness is not just physical, it's mental. Uncertainty wears people down. Long crises create anxiety, fatigue, hopelessness. Mental resilience becomes as important as material resources. People who adapt best are those who accept uncertainty, adjust expectations, focus on controllable actions. Preparedness is as much about mindset as it is about material readiness. Information becomes scarce and distorted during conflict. Rumors spread faster than facts. Fear amplifies misinformation. Prepared systems prioritize multiple information sources, local communication, trust networks. The ability to interpret uncertainty becomes a survival skill. Not every problem needs immediate action. Some require patience. Modern systems are optimized for efficiency. That's a weakness in crisis. Highly optimized systems lack redundancy. Prepared systems sacrifice efficiency for flexibility. They accept slower processes, backup options, local alternatives. Adaptation beats perfection. Many people prepare because they want control. But global crises are not controllable. Preparedness isn't about dominating outcomes. It's about reducing vulnerability. It's about creating buffers. Expecting control leads to frustration. Accepting uncertainty builds resilience. Technology can increase resilience, but only when supported. Digital systems fail without power. Networks fail without maintenance. Prepared thinking recognizes technology as a tool, not a guarantee. Low-tech solutions often prove more durable in long crises. Balance matters. When systems break down, people look to each other. Trust becomes currency. Communities with high social cohesion share resources, enforce norms, resolve conflicts peacefully. Communities without trust collapse faster, even with more resources. War tests social fabric more than material wealth. Fear creates hoarding. Hoarding creates shortages. Shortages create conflict. This cycle accelerates collapse. Prepared societies actively counter scarcity thinking by encouraging cooperation, communicating transparently, preventing panic. This is hard, but essential. Preparedness is not a checklist. It's ongoing. Conditions change. Threats evolve. Resources shift. Rigid plans break. Flexible frameworks endure. The goal is not to predict every scenario, but to build capacity to respond. So far, we've explored destruction, collapse, safety, and resilience. Now we turn to practical continuity. Not tactics, but strategic stability. In the next part, we'll examine how societies think about essential stockpiles, redundancy, sustaining life during prolonged disruption, and why long-term survival depends less on fear and more on foresight. When people imagine surviving a global war, the focus is usually on things: food, water, supplies, gear. But survival isn't about having the most stuff. It's about keeping key systems alive. Because if certain systems fail for too long, no amount of stockpiling can replace them. Here's the real question. What must continue functioning for human life to persist? Not comfortably, not conveniently, but at all. Once you ask that, the picture changes. Survival becomes less about hoarding and more about continuity. At the most basic level, human societies depend on a small number of critical systems: water access, food production, energy, medical care, information flow, social coordination. If these systems fail completely, even temporarily, recovery becomes exponentially harder. Everything else is secondary. Water is the first hard limit. Without food, humans survive weeks. Without water, days. Modern water systems are fragile. Pumps require power. Treatment plants require chemicals. Distribution relies on infrastructure. Long-term survival depends not just on stored water, but on renewable access. Continuity matters more than quantity. A small, reliable source beats a large, finite one. Food stockpiles feel comforting, but food is consumed once. Food production, on the other hand, is a system. Modern food systems depend on fertilizers, fuel, transportation, global trade. Disruption doesn't cause instant famine. It causes delayed hunger. Prepared societies think in cycles. Production, preservation, distribution. Continuity beats abundance every time. Energy is what keeps everything else alive. No energy means no clean water, no refrigeration, no communication, no medical equipment. Modern societies rely heavily on centralized energy systems. Resilience comes from diversification, not scale. Small, localized energy sources, even limited ones, can sustain critical functions long after large systems fail. Medical systems don't collapse loudly. They erode. Supplies run low. Staff burn out. Equipment fails. The danger isn't dramatic injury. It's untreated infection, chronic illness, and preventable death. Long-term survival depends on basic care continuity, disease prevention, sanitation. Medicine is as much about infrastructure as it is about knowledge. Information determines behavior. Without reliable information, panic spreads, resources are misused, conflicts escalate. In prolonged crises, misinformation is as dangerous as physical threats. Continuity of information doesn't require speed, it requires trust. Local, verified communication outlasts high-tech networks. This is the system everything else depends on. Rules, norms, cooperation. When coordination breaks, violence increases. Resources are wasted. Recovery becomes impossible. Societies don't collapse because they lack supplies. They collapse because they lose trust. Continuity of social order matters more than material wealth. Abundance feels safe, but abundance without continuity creates false confidence. Stockpiles are static. Systems are dynamic. Once stockpiles run out, only systems remain. Prepared thinking prioritizes renewal over storage, skills over objects, relationships over isolation. There's a paradox in preparedness. Trying to prepare for everything often prepares you for nothing. Rigid plans assume predictable outcomes. Global conflict guarantees unpredictability. Flexible systems adapt. Rigid systems snap. Resilient systems have backups. Not perfect backups, workable ones. Multiple ways to get water, produce food, communicate, coordinate. Redundancy slows collapse and buys time. Time is survival. In crises, time allows adaptation, learning, reorganization. The goal of preparedness isn't to win a crisis. It's to survive long enough for conditions to change. Every system that continues functioning buys time. Highly centralized systems are efficient until they fail. Local systems are less efficient, but more durable. Long-term survival favors local production, local decision-making, local cooperation. Global systems may return eventually, but survival depends on local continuity first. Systems don't survive on their own. People maintain them. Burnout is a silent killer of continuity. Long crises require rotation of responsibility, shared burden, psychological support. Ignoring the human cost accelerates collapse. Preparedness isn't about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming less fragile. It's about reducing points of failure. It's about keeping essential systems alive long enough for recovery to begin. So far, we've looked at destruction, collapse, safety, resilience, continuity. Now comes the hardest question of all. What happens after prolonged conflict? In the next part, we'll explore recovery, rebuilding, how societies emerge changed, and whether humanity actually learns from global catastrophe. Every conversation about global war eventually reaches the same quiet question. What happens after? Not during the explosions, not during the shortages, but after the dust settles. History shows that survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a much harder chapter. Recovery doesn't start when the war ends. It starts when the rate of collapse slows. When systems stop failing faster than they can be repaired. This moment often goes unnoticed. There's no announcement, no clear victory, just a gradual shift from chaos to fragile order. The first goal is not rebuilding. It's stopping further loss. That means preventing disease outbreaks, restoring basic water access, re-establishing food distribution, reducing violence. Stability comes before progress. Without it, nothing else sticks. Destruction is fast. Recovery is slow. Breaking systems takes minutes. Rebuilding trust, infrastructure, and skills takes years. And unlike destruction, recovery is uneven. Some areas stabilize quickly. Others remain stuck for generations. After prolonged conflict, knowledge becomes currency. Not money, not resources. Skills. People who can repair, teach, organize, adapt. These individuals quietly shape the future. Recovery follows competence, not authority. One common myth is that global conflict sends humanity back to the Stone Age. That almost never happens. Technology fragments. Some regions lose advanced systems entirely. Others preserve pieces. The future becomes uneven. High-tech islands, low-tech zones, hybrid solutions. Progress doesn't disappear, it rearranges. Global systems take the longest to return. Local systems return first. Food, energy, trade, governance. Communities that adapted locally during collapse rebuild faster afterward. Recovery favors decentralization, self-sufficiency, cooperation. Centralized control often lags behind reality. Post-conflict economies don't restart, they evolve. Early stages look simple. Barter, labor exchange, resource sharing. Eventually, structured systems return, but they rarely look the same as before. Trust determines what survives. Money may lose meaning temporarily. Value does not. Value shifts to food, skills, security, information. Over time, stable exchange systems reappear, but they reflect the scars of collapse. Infrastructure can be rebuilt. Psychology takes longer. Post-conflict societies often show higher caution, lower tolerance for instability, stronger community bonds, deep trauma. The future world is shaped as much by memory as by technology. Sometimes, but not always. History shows two possible paths. One path leads to stronger safeguards, better cooperation, reduced risk tolerance. The other leads to normalization of danger, repetition of mistakes, gradual escalation. Which path wins depends on leadership, memory, and pressure. Post-war worlds don't reset. They inherit everything. Old rivalries, old fears, old power dynamics. But they also inherit lessons. The future becomes a negotiation between trauma and hope. Some believe global catastrophe forces humanity together. Sometimes it does, briefly, but unity fades without maintenance. Long-term cooperation requires shared incentives, mutual trust, institutional memory. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the active management of it. Survival isn't about living through disaster. It's about shaping what comes after. The survivors decide which systems return, which values persist, which mistakes repeat. The future is written by those who remain functional when others can't. Thinking about recovery isn't fear-based. It's responsibility-based. Every resilient system today reduces suffering tomorrow. Every skill learned now shortens recovery later. Preparedness isn't about expecting collapse. It's about refusing to be helpless if it comes. Global conflict doesn't end humanity. It tests it. What survives isn't the strongest weapon or the largest economy. It's the systems that endure, the people who adapt, the communities that cooperate. So the real question isn't whether humanity survives a global war. The real question is, what kind of world do we choose to rebuild afterward? Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. See you next video.